Marcus would never forget the sound of his neighbor's laughter, especially since everyone insisted the old man had never spoken a word in his life. The apartment complex on Maple Street wasn't much to look at, but it was cheap, and Marcus needed cheap. Fresh out of college with student loan payments breathing down his neck, he'd settled for a one-bedroom unit with paper-thin walls and a persistent smell of mildew. Then came the conversations. The building housed mostly elderly tenants who kept to themselves, which suited Marcus just fine. He worked nights at a call center and needed to sleep during the day, so the quieter, the better. The second voice was quieter, harder to distinguish, but unmistakably present. Every morning at exactly 9 o'clock, the elderly resident would shuffle down the hallway, his slippered feet creating a distinctive scuffing sound against the worn carpet. On his way to work one evening, he lingered in the hallway, hoping to catch a glimpse of his talkative neighbor, thin and stooped, with wispy gray hair and thick glasses. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone far older than his voice suggested. Marcus pressed his ear to the wall, trying to reconcile the vibrant voice he heard with the frail, silent figure he'd encountered. He knocked on the door to 4B and waited. After several minutes, it opened to reveal the same elderly man who looked at Marcus with pale, questioning eyes. The discussion seemed particularly animated that evening, with both voices overlapping and interrupting each other. At one point, Marcus could have sworn he heard his own name mentioned, though he couldn't be certain. What struck Marcus most, however, was the complete silence. No footsteps, no rustling clothes, no clearing of the throat. He's been here for 15 years, poor soul. Born deaf and mute, keeps to himself mostly, never been any trouble. Quiet as a mouse, that one. The old man glided down the hallway like a ghost, pausing only to nod politely at Marcus before disappearing around the corner. Marcus pressed. He hasn't made a sound since the day he moved in. Maybe you're hearing the television or sounds from another unit. These old buildings can play tricks on you. Sometimes Marcus would hear what sounded like arguments, with voices raised in anger or frustration. Other times, the discussions seemed almost conspiratorial, conducted in urgent whispers that somehow still penetrated the wall with startling clarity. I hear conversations coming from his apartment almost every night. The other Marcus spoke with intimate knowledge of his life, revealing secrets he'd never shared with anyone. The voices were too clear, too consistent to be coming from elsewhere. They asked to search the apartment for hidden recording devices or speakers that might explain the voices. Mr. Petrov nodded eagerly, gesturing for them to look anywhere they pleased. When they knocked, Mr. Petrov answered immediately, his expression confused and concerned. And they always came from the same location, directly through the wall that separated his bedroom from 4B. The officers searched every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. They found nothing. In no way anyone could be generating the sounds you're describing. The conversations seemed to revolve around him, his schedule, his habits, his vulnerabilities, but the conversations continued, always resuming shortly after he settled into bed. One night, he distinctly heard his neighbor's gravelly voice say, "He's getting suspicious. We need to be more careful." The building was completely silent for the first time since he'd moved in. No conversations, no laughter, no whispered conspiracies. He pointed to his ears and shook his head, then touched his throat and repeated the gesture. The message was clear. He was deaf and mute. As he pretended to check his mailbox, the door to 4B creaked open. He'd return an hour later with what Marcus assumed were groceries, based on the rustling of plastic bags. They talked for hours, sometimes well into the evening, their conversations punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter or what sounded like heated debate. For the first week, everything was blissfully silent. Armed with his phone set to record, he pressed himself against the wall and waited. Sure enough, the familiar voices began their nightly dialogue. This time, however, something was different. The second voice, the one that had always been harder to hear, was becoming clearer. It started on a Tuesday afternoon as Marcus was settling into bed after his shift. "I just wanted to introduce myself since we're neighbors." A low murmur drifted through the wall from apartment 4B, the unit adjacent to his bedroom. At first, he assumed it was a television or radio, but as the days passed, he began to make out distinct voices. He smiled awkwardly, waved goodbye, and retreated to his apartment, his mind racing. If his neighbor couldn't hear or speak, then who had been having those lengthy conversations? Two of them having what sounded like lengthy, animated discussions. Even when he couldn't make out the specific words, the rhythmic back and forth of human voices helped him drift off to sleep. It reminded him of falling asleep as a child to the sound of his parents talking in the next room. The voice he heard most clearly belonged to his neighbor, an elderly man with a gravelly tone that carried easily through the thin drywall. Marcus had never seen his neighbor face to face, but he'd noticed the man's habits. The conversations became a strange comfort to Marcus. After 3 weeks of this routine, Marcus's curiosity got the better of him. The man who emerged was not what Marcus had expected. That night, the conversations resumed as usual. The next morning, Marcus decided to introduce himself properly. "Hi, I'm Marcus from 4A, he said, extending his hand. The old man stared at him blankly, then made a series of quick hand gestures that Marcus recognized as sign language. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty hallway. That evening, Marcus called the building's landlord, Mrs. Henderson, a nonsense woman in her 70s who had managed the property for decades. "Oh, you must mean Mr. Petrov," she said when Marcus described his neighbor. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Henderson's tone sharpened. "Young man, I've known Harold Petrov longer than you've been out of diapers." But Marcus knew what he'd heard. As the weeks passed, the conversations grew more frequent and more intense. Sleep became elusive. Marcus found himself lying awake, listening to every word, trying to piece together the fragments he could understand. The paranoia began to consume him. Marcus started varying his routine, coming home at different times, leaving his television on to mask any sounds from next door. One particularly cold Thursday night, Marcus decided he'd had enough. Marcus's blood turned to ice as he recognized it. The second voice was his own. He was listening to his neighbor have detailed conversations with a perfect imitation of his voice, discussing his daily activities, his fears, his most private thoughts. With shaking hands, Marcus called the police. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived and followed him to apartment 4B. The officers explained the situation through gestures and written notes. The apartment was sparse and meticulously clean. No television, no radio, no electronic devices beyond a basic lamp and an old refrigerator. "There's no one here," the younger officer told Marcus. After they left, Marcus sat in his apartment, staring at the wall that separated him from 4B. The silence was somehow worse than the voices. Marcus finally drifted off to sleep near dawn. He heard it one last time, his neighbor's gravelly voice drifting through the wall, speaking to someone who wasn't there. "Don't worry," it said. "He's almost ready." The cameras in Jenna's house turned to follow her even when the system was supposedly offline. But it was until she heard her own voice whispering back to her from the smart speaker that she realized she was never truly alone. Jenna had always prided herself on being independent. At 28, she'd saved enough to buy her first house, a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet suburban neighborhood where children rode bikes down treed streets and neighbors still waved from their porches. He was in his early 40s, worked in tech, and had the kind of easy smile that made him instantly likable, especially a woman living alone. When he mentioned he could install a smart home security system at cost, cameras, motion sensors, smart locks, even a voice assistant, Jenna jumped at the chance. This was the kind of place where leaving doors unlocked felt safe. Where the biggest concern was whether Mrs. Henderson's cat was digging in your garden again. That's why when Marcus moved in next door 3 months ago, she was genuinely grateful for his offer to help modernize her new home. He explained everything as he went, how the cameras would detect motion, how she could monitor everything from her phone, how the smart speaker, which he'd placed in her living room, would let her control the entire system with voice commands. The system's named Sarah. I thought it had a nice ring to it. She'd walk into the kitchen and catch a glimpse of the camera above her sink, swiveling slightly, as if tracking her movement. But when she looked directly at it, the camera sat perfectly still, its red recording light steady and unblinking. "You can never be too careful these days," Marcus had said, his hands already sketching out camera placements on her kitchen island. The installation took a weekend. Marcus worked methodically, drilling holes, threading wires, and programming devices. "They shouldn't unless you've enabled tracking mode. Are they moving on you? Just say, 'Hey Sarah,' and then whatever you want," he'd explained, patting the sleek black cylinder. "But call me if it happens again, okay? I want you to feel safe." Jenna had laughed, like having a digital roommate. Jenna would enter a room and sense movement in her peripheral vision. Just a slight adjustment, a minor turn. Never when she looked directly, always just beyond her line of sight. She began timing her movements, trying to catch them in the act, but they seemed to anticipate her attention. Jenna felt safer knowing she could check her cameras from work, see mail deliveries, and watch squirrels dart across her yard. The cameras sat motionless, their feeds clear and steady on Jenna's phone. He ran diagnostics, checked settings, and found nothing unusual. The peace of mind was worth every penny Marcus had saved her. Exactly, one who never sleeps and always keeps watch. Or maybe commands from other smart homes in the neighborhood. "I'll update the firmware." A soft voice drifted from the living room, so quiet she almost missed it beneath the sound of rain against her windows. The living room glowed with the speaker's blue light, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. She padded downstairs, bare feet silent on the hardwood, and found the smart speaker glowing with a faint blue light. She was wearing an old college t-shirt and pajama shorts, the same outfit she'd described to Marcus just that afternoon when he asked about her evening plans. She joked about her glamorous Friday night attire while bringing in packages he'd accepted for her. For the first week, the system worked perfectly. Then she began to notice the cameras moving. It started small, so small she convinced herself she was imagining things. "Marcus," she called over the fence one evening as he tended his garden. "Do the cameras automatically follow motion?" In her peripheral vision, she could see them turning, adjusting, and following her through her own home. The smart speaker began commenting on her activities in its whispered voice, the book she was reading, the movie she paused, the phone call she'd just finished. Keena tried recording it with her phone, but the audio picked up nothing. She mentioned it to Marcus during one of their increasingly frequent conversations over the fence. He looked up, wiping soil from his hands. She was certain it had been facing the window the day before. The house felt different now. Not like a sanctuary, but a fishbowl. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every creak might mask the whir of a camera motor. Things only Marcus would know. When she checked the app on her phone, it showed the camera pointing at the window, but her eyes told a different story. "I thought maybe, probably just my imagination. I can take a look if you want. Sometimes the motors can be a bit sensitive." "Okay." But when Marcus came over that night to check the system, everything appeared normal. "Must have been a glitch," he said, packing up his tools. The cameras continued their subtle dance over the following days. Then Sarah started whispering. Jenna first heard it on a Tuesday night while reading in bed. "Hey Sarah," Jenna whispered. "What did you just say?" "I'm sorry, I don't understand that request. Were you speaking?" "I'm sorry, I don't understand that request." But Jenna had heard something. She was certain of it. The whispering became a nightly occurrence, always when she was alone, always just loud enough to notice, but too soft to understand. "Sometimes these devices can pick up radio interference," he said. But the whispering didn't stop. If anything, it grew clearer. On Friday night, As Jenna lay in bed, scrolling through her phone, she heard her name, clear as day, whispered from downstairs. Jenna. She crept to the top of the stairs, heart hammering. Jenna came to whisper again, "You look beautiful tonight." The words hit her like ice water. "Hey, Sarah," Jenna called down, her voice trembling. "Who are you talking to?" Silence. The blue light faded. Saturday morning, Jenna noticed the camera in her bedroom had rotated toward her bed. That evening, as she cooked dinner, she heard Sarah whisper about the pasta sauce she was making. The same sauce she'd mentioned craving to Marcus during their conversation about Italian restaurants earlier that week. The cameras tracked her more boldly now, no longer bothering to hide their movement. Sunday night, Jenna sat in her living room, staring at the black cylinder on her coffee table. "I know you're listening," she said to the room. The speaker pulsed blue. Then, in a voice that was unmistakably her own, but speaking words she'd never said, it whispered back, "I know you know." Jenna bolted upright. That was her voice, perfectly mimicked, down to the slight rasp she got when nervous. But she had never spoken those words. The cameras all turned toward her simultaneously, their red lights blinking in unison like a heartbeat. Outside Marcus's house sat dark, except for one upstairs window, where the blue glow of multiple monitors cast dancing shadows on the walls. Jenna grabbed her keys and ran for the door, but as her hand touched the smart lock, Sarah's voice, her own voice, called out one final whisper that would echo in her nightmares. "Where are you going, Jenna? You're already home." The lock clicked, sealing her inside with the eyes that never sleep. Sometimes the people trying to save you are the ones everyone else thinks are crazy. By the time I understood what my neighbor was desperately trying to tell me, it was almost too late. She moved into the small rental house on Maple Street, barely noticed the man living next door, a thin, weathered figure who kept his curtains drawn and his lawn overgrown. The real estate agent had mentioned him in passing, calling him harmless but odd, and Chloe was perfectly content to leave it at that. Chloe had always prided herself on being the type of person who minded her own business. The first object appeared on her third morning in the house. She opened her front door to retrieve the newspaper and nearly stepped on it. A small, smooth river stone placed deliberately in the center of her welcome mat. It was perfectly round and polished to an almost mirror-like finish. Chloe picked it up, turning it over in her palm. It felt unnaturally cold, even in the morning sun. The sound echoed hollowly, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard the soft shuffle of feet, and the door opened just wide enough to reveal a single, pale blue eye. Again, it was placed with a deliberate precision on her doormat. Instead, he lifted a trembling finger and pointed past her, toward her house. Then, just as quickly, he shut the door. Probably just fell out of someone's bag. She decided to ignore whatever strange game he was playing and went back inside. She glanced toward her neighbor's house. The curtains were closed, but she caught the faintest movement behind them, as if someone had quickly stepped back from the window. A photograph, too blurred to make out clearly, but it looked like it might have been taken inside a house. She started checking her porch before fully opening the door, peering through the peephole first. The objects were always there by dawn, placed with the same careful precision. Has he threatened you directly? Spoken to you at all? She positioned herself by her living room window with a clear view of the front porch and waited. Her house. He doesn't seem to be able to speak. But these things, he's leaving. Chloe shrugged and tossed the stone into her garden. But the next morning, there was another one. This time, the stone was darker, almost black, with what looked like a small crack running through its center. Damn, but something about it felt familiar. Chloe spent the day trying it in various doors and drawers, till she remembered the small basement storage room she'd never bothered to explore. He was older than she thought, maybe 60, with silver hair that looked like it hadn't been combed in weeks. Her hand shook as she opened it. Same dark hair, same build, same bright smile. But as Chloe flipped through them, the woman's expression changed. The smile became forced, then disappeared entirely. In the later photos, Jenny looked terrified. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame. But it was his expression that made her uncomfortable. A look of desperate urgency mixed with something that might have been fear. By the fourth day, when she found a stone that appeared to be stained with something dark red, Chloe decided to confront her neighbor. She had never asked why the house was available so quickly, why the rent was so low. Jenny wrote about feeling watched, about things moving in her house when she wasn't looking, about voices calling her name from empty rooms. Then he backed away, never taking his eyes off her front door, as if he were afraid of what might come out of it. The neighbor keeps leaving me things. Warnings, I think. She pounded on his door, tears streaming down her face. A stone for danger, a broken flower for something dying, a torn photograph for someone watching. He had been waiting for this moment, hoping she would finally understand. On his kitchen table were dozens of objects, stones, flowers, photographs, keys, each carefully labeled with dates and meanings. He had been keeping a record, trying to warn Jenny, and now trying to warn her. I finally understand what he's been trying to tell me. But I think it's too late. If someone finds this, please know that I didn't leave willingly. And whatever you do, don't stay here after dark. She walked across the small strip of dead grass that separated their properties and knocked on his door. A mute old man leaving random objects on her porch wasn't exactly a criminal emergency. "Are you leaving these stones on my porch?" Chloe asked, holding up the latest addition to her unwanted collection. The eye widened slightly. Then the man opened the door a few more inches. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Chloe stood there for a moment, feeling foolish. The man was clearly not well. But as he approached her porch, he suddenly stopped and looked directly at her window, even in the darkness. She could see his expression, not the look of someone caught doing something wrong, but the look of someone trying to communicate something desperately important. But the objects kept coming. A wilted flower with its stem broken in half, a child's toy car with its wheels torn off. Each morning, Chloe would find something new, and each item seemed more disturbing than the last. After 2 weeks, she called the police. Officer Martinez was sympathetic, but unhelpful. "No," Chloe admitted. "Look, I'll have a talk with him, but unless he's actually harassing you or making threats, there's not much we can do about someone leaving trash on public property." "It's not trash," Chloe said, but she could hear how it sounded. That night, Chloe decided to stay up and catch him in the act. At 3:17 a.m., she saw him. He moved like a ghost across the yard, carrying something small in his hands. He placed the object on her mat, then stood there for a long moment, staring at her house. The next morning, the object was a key. It was old and tarnished, with a peculiar shape that didn't match any lock in her house. The key fit perfectly. Inside the storage room, behind a stack of paint cans, Chloe found a cardboard box marked Jenny. Personal items. Photographs spilled out, dozens of them, showing a young woman who looked startlingly similar to Chloe. At the bottom of the box was a journal. The entries started normal enough. Jenny had moved into the house 18 months ago, excited about her new life. But gradually, the entries became disturbing. The final entry was dated just 3 days before Chloe had moved in. "He's in the house. I can hear him walking around downstairs, but when I go to look, there's no one there." Chloe's blood ran cold as she realized she had never wondered what happened to the previous tenant. That evening, as darkness fell, she heard it for the first time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, walking through her kitchen, while Chloe was sitting in her living room, and she lived alone. She grabbed her phone and ran outside, not stopping until she reached her neighbor's porch. When he opened it, she saw something she hadn't noticed before: relief. He gestured for her to come inside, and for the first time in weeks, Chloe felt safe. He handed her a piece of paper with shaky handwriting. "He takes them at night. Jenny tried to leave, he brought her back. Through his window, Chloe could see her house, and standing in her living room window, barely visible in the darkness, was the silhouette of someone else. Someone who had been waiting for her to come home. And with that final story, we pull back from the abyss. For now, tales of ordinary lives brushing against the extraordinary, the terrifying, the unexplainable, from the shadow that mimics to the voice that calls from an empty house. We've seen tonight how thin the veil between our reality and a much darker one can be. These stories are not just fiction. They are born from real experiences, whispered in hushed tones, and shared to remind us that we are not always alone. And that's the most chilling thought, isn't it? Perhaps one of tonight's stories reminded you of something that happened to you, or to someone you know. A strange occurrence you've tried to forget. A noise in the night you rationalized away. A figure you saw for just a second. The details of your own brush with the darkness are what give this channel life. I invite you to leave your own story in the comments below. Let us know what you've seen in the shadows. If these stories sent a shiver down your spine, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps these tales reach others who need a reminder to check their locks at night. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, and you won't want to be left in the dark. Until next time, remember that you are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of the bone-deep certainty that you are not.